Today, as you can see from the title, I'm about to totally humiliate myself and annoy 90% of the comments as I do my full 1 to 20 Premier League predictions. We're going to start at the bottom of the table and work our way slowly up. And in 20th, I'm sorry to say, Leicester, I've got you. Look, there's no doubt last season Leicester, an exceptional championship campaign, promoted as champions, 97 points, playing some of the most attractive football in the division. It was very, very positive. But going into this season, I still feel a bit negative. To be honest with you, the main reason for that negativity stems from the PSR-related points deduction that is still hanging over the club. It could be between 6 points, 12 points, who really knows right now. Let's say Leicester start the season 9 points off the pace already. That's an uphill battle. In terms of losing Maresca for Steve Cooper, I don't know whether it's as big a swing as some people have talked about. I think Enzo Maresca would have been very wedded to his style of football, almost akin to Vincent Kompany coming up with one of the greatest championship sides we've seen in recent years. That Burnley team that popped the ball about didn't really work in the Premier League. So maybe Steve Cooper, a bit more attritional, kept Nottingham Forest in the league in the past, playing a slightly more basic, no offence, brand of football, might be a net positive. But when I look at the squad, I still think there are areas of concern at the back without Fass and Vestergaard. We've seen them in the Premier League in recent years. I like the signing of Okoli. There's going to be a lot asked of Harry Winks. I think he looks great on the ball in a ball-dominant side like we saw with Leicester in the Championship last year. How does he look when they don't have the ball as much, when he doesn't have Kieran Dewsbury-Hall to help him split the lines? And up front, Jamie Vardy, yes, big championship output last season was 18 goals, but he's 37 now. Patson Daka, across his 2 Premier League campaigns, is yet to hit, I think, more than 5 Premier League goals. That's a concern for me. They've added and are still adding players. I kind of like the Bobby De Cordova-Reid move. He offers versatility in a number of different positions. They, of course, confirmed Fatawu as a permanent signing as well. It looks like Holozek is going to join the club this week. So there are positive moves in the transfer market. I'm just too worried. 20th. In 19th, it's not a good story for the Championship promotee so far. Sorry, Southampton fans, I've got you. The main issue for me revolves around the defence. It was extremely leaky last year in the Championship. 63 goals conceded. I think that was the 15th best record in the second tier. Has that been improved enough for Premier League attacks? I think there are certainly positives in getting the loan players to sign on permanent deals, like Flynn Downs, a brilliant acquisition. Harwood Bellis, also a very solid acquisition. But have there been enough Premier League ready recruits or players we think can hit the ground running immediately to improve on what was already a bit of a mixed bag at the back? I'm also slightly concerned about the attacking areas. You know, Che Adams scored quite a lot of goals last season. He's left for Torino. There's big pressure on Adam Armstrong to score goals, I feel. Hasn't been able to do it in his 2 Premier League seasons. I think it's just 4 Premier League goals across those 2 campaigns. Proven goal-scoring numbers, great XG values and shot locations in the Championship, but hasn't yet been able to translate that to the Premier League. Can he do it this season? There's a lot of pressure. I do like the signing of Ben Brereton Diaz. To be honest with you, I think in the short period of time he spent at Sheffield United when he scored 6 in 14 last season, he proved he could do it to a certain degree. And alongside a player like Adam Armstrong, maybe it takes the weight off his shoulders a bit. But overall, my concerns around Southampton's play style and whether or not they are going to be willing to adapt quickly enough concern me. You know, I know in the Championship playoff final, they shifted to that back 5. Like I said earlier, it was impressive and they moved away from the 4 back when they were getting, you know, walloped, I think particularly to the Leicester game. Fair enough. I think they're going to have to really improve that defence to have any hope this season. I predicted it last year and I think I'm going to stick with what I did. I'm going to say all the promoted teams go back down. I've got Ipswich. Now, there's no doubt the biggest positive this summer, the best signing this summer, is getting Kieran McKenna locked down to that new 4-year contract after the back-to-back promotions. But my issues are really around the base of that squad. I look at the players with the most minutes last season, the likes of Leif Davis, Morsey, Chaplin, Wolfenden, Burgess, Luongo, Burns. A lot of these players were with Ipswich in League One. They were amazing in League One and they were sensational last year in the Championship. But can they maintain a base of 6 or 7 League One players in the Premier League? I think that's a big ask. Now, the additions this summer, Amari Hutchinson, Liam Delap, Jacob Greaves, I think, has really flown under the radar as well. Hull's player of the season last year. Artem Muric, who really improved Burnley when he came in between the sticks. Ben Johnson, who's got Premier League experience. They are smart pickups. And there's no doubt that this Ipswich team can score goals. We have seen them blow teams away, both in League One and at Championship level. Their ability to adapt and change style, the pace on the break, the amount of late goals I associate with Ipswich in the Championship last season is also playing on my mind a bit. Do those late goals come in the Premier League? And look, I'm sure Portman Road is going to be an absolutely nightmarish place to go. A little bit like Luton last season. Nobody really wanted to go to Kenilworth Road, especially on a Friday night football. It was so close, it was so loud, it was difficult. But Luton couldn't maintain it. And I slightly am concerned Ipswich won't be able to either. But I think they'll put up a better fight than Leicester or Southampton. Okay, in 17th, I'm slightly concerned about them actually. I've got Brentford. Of course, last season, one of the most injury-hit campaigns, if not the most injury-hit campaign of any team in the Premier League. I actually think by days missed, they were number one in the league. And at the end of the day, Thomas Frank managed to keep them above water. 16th in the league. I think just the 10 wins, though. 19 losses, 65 goals conceded. At times, it was a bit of a struggle. So what business have they done and what changes have they made this summer to arrest that decline? Well, first and foremost, they're going to have players back fit. Now, Rico Henry and Aaron Hickey haven't done an awful lot of work, so it might take them some time to get back up to full fitness, but they have brought in Igor Thiago. The issue is, immediately, he's picked up that knee injury. Looks like he's going to be out until December. Ivan Toney will be back for a full season. Or will he? Is he potentially going to leave this summer? I've seen interest from Saudi Arabia in the last couple of days. So with 725 days missed through injury last season being added to with Igor Thiago, the worries have started to build. I am very positive, though, about the signing of Fabio Carvalho this week. I think last season at Hull, he proved he can be a big goal threat and a big creative force, something that potentially they've missed from wide areas. Overall, though, I still feel there are quite a few needs in this squad. I'm surprised they haven't dipped harder into the fullback market. I'm surprised they're not going for another striker now that Igor Thiago has picked up that long-term injury. I'm not hugely worried about them because Thomas Frank, I think, is an excellent manager, but I struggle to see them, pushing too high up the table. In 16th, I've actually got Wolves. Now, there's no doubt last season there were some big positives to their campaign. I think Gary O'Neill really did a good job given that he had very little time to implement anything in pre-season. He came in so close to the opening game. But there were big worries for me. By expected goal difference, they were 18th in the Premier League. Only West Ham United conceded more open play XG than Wolves last campaign. That needs to be arrested. And the defensive work they've done this summer doesn't point to a huge change in those numbers. In fact, with the exit of Max Kilman, another year on the books for Craig Dawson, I'm even more worried. And I think it's Craig Dawson's age and a lack of clear success that worries me the most. Last season with Dawson, 1.5 goals conceded, 1.4 points per game. Without Dawson, 2.2 goals conceded, 0.8 points per game. That is big pressure on a player who is coming towards the twilight of his career. You combine that with your club captain and Max Kilman being sold, Mosquera returning from loan. You've also got Santi Bueno in there as well. But if Gary O'Neill does persist with what we've seen in pre-season, an attempted shift to a back four, does it suit the fullback to wing-back ratio with players like Nelson Semedo at the club? Not for me. But look, hopefully the attack can bail him out to some level. I think Matheus Cunha was excellent last season. Big pressure on Larson to come in as the number 9 and deliver, and they've managed to keep hold of Hwang. They have, though, lost Pedro Neto, haven't they? And yes, he might have spent a large proportion of last season out injured, but he still put up 11 goals and assists last season in those limited minutes. So that's going to need replacing. It could go one or two ways here, and I'm slightly worried. Another team I'm a little bit worried about is Fulham. I've got them 15th. Last season, of course, they finished 13th, 13 wins, 17 losses, and the biggest dub for them is being able to keep hold of Marco Silva. I think he's an excellent coach. He's obviously turned down numerous approaches now from Saudi Arabia, and that's a win. But my big concerns around Fulham come from the exits. João Palhinha is a huge player to replace. The most tackles and interceptions of any player in Europe, a one-man wrecking ball in midfield. Who's been brought in to replace him? Nobody as we sit here today. Willian was an absolutely central figure to their attack last season. He's no longer at the club, And the pressure on Emil Smith-Rowe to come in and hit the ground running, which he's done in pre-season, and I love him as a player, is large in that role. They've also lost Tim Ream, a huge figure behind the scenes, and Tosin, who was a starting centre-back for them last year. I do still like Bassine Diop, though. So overall, I think they'll be fine, but I can't believe they haven't done extra work to replace Polina. I know he's almost irreplaceable, but the midfield additions haven't really been there yet. You know, Sessegnon, fine. Obviously, he's going to come in, you would think, as sort of cover for Anthony Robinson, who was exceptional, put up the most minutes of any player in the Fulham squad last season. But, you know, they've also lost Bobby De Cordova-Reid, who was an absolute utility man, played all across the pitch for them. Yeah, I like the business, but the exits worry me badly. In 14th, and just pipping them, I was really tossing and turning between 14th and 15th here, is Nottingham Forest. Last season, not a great campaign. 17th, just 6 points ahead of Luton. But their business this summer, the fact that they've kept hold of a lot of key players, and the overall quality of the starting 11 that has developed there for me, has led me to just bump them ahead of Fulham. The goalkeeping has been an issue at Nottingham Forest ever since Dean Henderson left, I felt. They should have conceded 57 last season. They actually conceded 67. It's one of the biggest negative swings in terms of XG conceded in the entire league. In fact, by expected goals against, they actually had the 5th best defensive record in the whole top division. And I think a large part of that comes from Nuno. He is going to be a very pragmatic defensive manager, and that might prove to be a bit of a problem for this Forest side. But there are a lot of players in there that work exceptionally well on the counter-attack, particularly a player like Anthony Elanga. You've also got Morgan Gibbs-White, who was, of course, their top creator last season. 10 assists. Chris Wood managed to score 14 goals. He's a consistent 10-plus goal-a-season striker across his Premier League career, pretty much. Tao Wonyi should be coming back to fitness. I love the addition of Milenkovic to play alongside their player of the year last year. Mario Olaina stayed as well, and surely they can expect a bigger season from Ibrahim Sangare. The first 11 excites me more than the teams below them, it has to be said. In 13th, and this pack of teams coming here, really hard, isn't it, to predict where they finish. I'm actually going to go for Brighton. Obviously, big change at the club this summer with De Zerbi leaving, Herzler coming in, still only 31 years old, also losing an absolute stalwart, one of the Premier League's better midfielders in Pascal Gross. There's a lot of change. And I don't necessarily think they're going to hit the ground immediately, despite the fact I think some of their players that they've signed this summer, i.e. Minter, is a real one to watch. I think he could have a big impact on this side. They've also got one of their key targets coming through the door this week in Gruda. That's £25 million. There's a lot of wide talent. Mitoma, Gruda, Minter, Adingra is still there. Scary. And when you add in a player like Mats Wife, who I'm sure they're hoping to some extent can replace some of the experience and guile in the midfield that Pascal Gross had, play him alongside Carlos Baleba, I think there's a very solid first 11. A better first 11 than Nottingham Forest have got, but I think Herzler's style of play is quite unique. It does take a little bit of getting used to, and for me, it might take a little bit of pain before they start to get that positivity. In 12th, I'm going for Bournemouth, who of course finished last season in 12th. And this is one of the picks that almost concerns me the most, because of course they started the season last year horribly. Now, a large part of that was down to the fixture list. It stunk. But after that initial sort of 8-game period, they really found a little bit of form up to New Year's. My issue with Bournemouth is they are quite spotty. You know, you think of that run that I just spoke about there, unbeaten from November to New Year's Eve. They didn't win another Premier League game between New Year's Eve and March. And when you pull a player like Dominic Solanke out the side, who was involved in 22 goals last season, by the way, that's 40% of their total Premier League output, I do have like a little alarm bell ringing in my head. But I still think that Iraola is one of the better managers in the Premier League. I really do. I like the addition of Howson to support Zabani and Senesi at the back. I think the midfield definitely grew, and I'm hoping for a big season from Alex Scott this year. Kirkes is an exceptional level talent. They just have to find goals. Because last season, Semenyo was the second top scorer with 8, but that was up against an XG of around 4. He scored some absolute belters in there. So is Unal going to bail him out? Is Clivert going to score the goals? There are players in the forward line to get goals, and I expect them to add to the team. You know, Eddie Nketiah still being talked about, but I think this is one of my riskier picks. Okay, in 11th, and I'm sure not what many people have got in their predictions. I've seen a lot of sort of 16th, 17th place finish for these guys. I've got Everton. Of course, last season they finished 15th, but that was with that serious points deduction, which meant they should have finished 12th if they hadn't have had the PSR-related issues. Now, they might well have those same issues again this season, which could totally scupper my prediction here. But I'm backing Deitch. The underlying numbers were actually very, very positive, you know, especially defensively. They were 10th by expected goal difference, 6th by expected goals against. Pickford had another great campaign, and they've managed to maintain Branthwaite. They've also added Jake O'Brien to the defensive unit, which I really like. They have lost Onana, which is going to be a problem, and I'm pretty sure they're going to have to add another player into that midfield unit, as good as players like James Garner have been. There are also issues with goal scoring, obviously. Last year, they scored 40 against an XG of 54. You know, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, the league's biggest underperformer in terms of XG, and that's not good. But I do really like the addition of Ilian Ndiaye. I feel like he fits into a Sean Dyche system lovely, and they tried to recruit him the year before. If he can refine that Sheffield United output, it's a big win. I'm convinced they'll sign another striker. I've seen links with Vitor Roque this week, which would be a bizarre one. But I also like the Lindstrom acquisition, and often with Sean Dyche teams, they're really more of a sum of their parts than individual superstars, and I think they're going to be very hard to beat yet again. The defensive record, I would be surprised to see take a huge downward spiral, and I just don't believe that the forward line will continue to underperform to that level of XG again. It was almost record numbers of underperformance with Ilian Ndiaye on the books, another striker coming through the door. I think that number will jump back up, and they could make a push for that 10th spot. It's a bold claim. In 10th, I've got Crystal Palace. Again, this one could well change towards the back end of the window depending on the business they've done. As we stand here today, they've only really lost Elise. If they also lose Gahey, you know, Joachim Anderson's supposedly in talks with Fulham too. Lose either of those two, I might drop them down. But there's no doubt last season that upon Ollie Glasner's arrival at the club, there was a big upturn in form. There was a shift in playing style that coincided with massive uplift in results. That ended up with them winning 6 of their last 7 games, the 5th best record in the league under Ollie Glasner. There was the 4-0 winning against United, there was the 5-0 win, the dismantling of that Aston Villa side as well. They were really good towards the back end of the season. Now, was that just a bubble that could burst at the start of this campaign, or was that legitimately them having a top-level coach in Ollie Glasner at the club? I'm going to say it was somewhere in between. For me, the strongest area of the recruitment last year was Adam Wharton. He really changed the game in the January window, and I actually think when he's paired alongside Doucouré, who is still yet to play alongside him consistently, they've got one of the better central midfield pairings in that area of the league. With the addition of Daichi Kamada as well, who's worked with Ollie Glasner in the past, I think you start to see a midfield structure building that is a little bit more solid, allows players like Eberechi Eze more freedom. Ismaila Sarr is going to have quite a lot of pressure on his shoulders, and I'm sure he's going to have to take his game to new levels to be able to replicate Elise's output, but Jean-Philippe Mateta scored 14 goals towards the back end of last season. If that wasn't a purple patch, and that was actually Ollie Glasner finding a super clutch player, as we kind of saw at the Olympics with France, they could do really well. We're into the top half now, and 9th, I've got West Ham, who I think have had one of the most remarkable summers I can remember in a long time. You look at their ins, Wan-Bissaka, Somerville, Todibo, Fulcro, Guilherme, Guido Rodriguez. It's amazing. And their starting 11 on paper is certainly going to push for a European level spot. I do think, though, that next season you might see the rewards from this transfer window a little bit more, just because there's been so many additions and so much work going on with that squad, it might take them a little bit of time to gel. Having said that, they are going to be a nightmare to play against. People might be counteracting that, saying they're going to finish way higher. I think they're going to be really pushing for a European spot in the comments below. And that might well be the case, but I think there's a couple of other narratives that just play into my mind why I've got them 9th. You know, Lopetegui is classically quite a defensive manager. David Moyes has not been harangued and run out of the London Stadium, but people have question marks about his style being too defensive. Well, per 90, his West Ham side scored more goals than Lopetegui's Madrid per 90 and Lopetegui's Sevilla per 90. And does Füllkrug's arrival mean that those goals suddenly come? He certainly had 3 excellent campaigns on the bounce in the Bundesliga and the Bundesliga 2. But classically, West Ham haven't signed forwards brilliantly since 2010. They've spent £300 million plus on over 50 forwards. 41 of those have scored fewer than 10 goals for the club. So is Füllkrug going to be an exception to the rule? A Bowen, an Antonio, a Colton Cole? Or is he just going to follow suit? Well, either way, they're going to have to tighten up at the back because last season they conceded the 18th most XG in the league. I think they have taken huge strides towards changing that. Huge strides. Wan-Bissaka, Todibo, Kilman is excellent, isn't it? Alvarez in front of them. The first 11 is amazing. I just think it might take a little bit of time to gel. Okay, here we go. This is where it starts to hot up, isn't it? People are going to start hammering me in the comments here. 8th, Chelsea. Now, last season, of course, they finished 6th thanks to that amazing end to the season, really, in which they lost just 1 of their final 15 Premier League games, but they still parted ways with the gaffer. And I think it's that unknown that has maybe put them 8th. I think Chelsea have the biggest swing factor of any team when you're predicting this. They could finish 8th, they could finish 3rd, they could finish 12th. It's a real unknown. And the ins have certainly been interesting. Obviously, there's been a lot of them, but I'm talking first team ins here. I think Pedro Neto, another player that could be a huge swing factor. If he's fit and firing, he's one of the league's most exciting wingers, but he's missed over 100 games of football in the last 3 seasons. Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall really knows the manager, but does he start in their best 11? And there's also the swing factor of the injury returns. You know, Nkunku could have a huge factor in Chelsea's season here. If Nkunku can stay fit, Chelsea will finish higher than 8th. Him and Cole Palmer, who's just signed that new contract, is one of the most exciting attacking duos, intelligence-wise, creative-wise, goal-scoring-wise, in the league. But how do they all fit into this Maresca system, and how does Maresca translate his style of football we saw so successfully in the Championship to this Chelsea side? Does he have the personnel? There are just so many question marks that I've ended up going with the slightly more consistent sides above them. And the first of those is Newcastle, who I've got in 7th, and this one's a tricky one for me because I could genuinely see them pushing for the top 4. I'm really torn on this. Of course, last season they finished 7th, but the injuries they had were almost Brentford level. They were catastrophic. And some of those injuries are still hampering them coming into this season. You know, Sven Botman still not back either. The backline is a little bit unsettled, but they have the star power of a player like Alexander Isak, 21 goals last season, an outrageously good pre-season. They've got the returning Harvey Barnes, who I think had 7 goal involvements in 8 starts. He had injury problems last season, now looks like he's ready to really attack the campaign. And he generally scores a lot of goals from open play, Harvey Barnes. But as we sit here today, there are just a few question marks, i.e., you know, he's not actually signed yet. But I still think Eddie Howe is such a good coach. The team is so aggressive with less injuries, no European football. They also have a big swing factor. Newcastle, they could easily finish 4th, Newcastle, if injuries go their way. They get good deals over the line in these last couple of weeks. Tonali comes back fit and firing. It's so hard to predict between 8th and 4th. It's so hard. In 6th, I've got Manchester United, another team that were just ravaged, like Newcastle, with injuries last season. The amount of defensive change we saw was comical. The most defensive pairings of any team in Europe's top 5 leagues because of injury. Varane out the door, Wan-Bissaka out the door. Feels like Lindelof about to be out the door. And the players they brought in, Yoro and Ligt, I think those are upgrades. Mazraoui, certainly a system upgrade on Aaron Wan-Bissaka, if not a defensive upgrade. Martial out for Xerxes, feels like an upgrade. Martinez back now and fit, ready to start the season. I was pretty impressed by United in the Community Shield against City. Obviously, it wasn't City's first team and it wasn't United's first team, but there were signs from players like Garnacho coming off the bench, Amad Diallo in the final third, that actually made me jump them a place here. I had Newcastle 6th and United 7th. I've put United up to 6th because of that. In 5th, I've got Aston Villa. I've seen a lot of people dropping Aston Villa down, and the reason seems to be, well, European football this year is really going to take it out of them. And I understand they're going to play the 2 extra league games because of the new Swiss format, but Are people forgetting that they played in Europe last season? You know, in an extremely draining and what people usually claim is, you know, Thursday, Sunday is so hard. Europa League, Europa Conference League is really going to take it out of you. Well, you know, it's Champions League this time, and I understand emotionally it might be quite draining. Playing better teams might take it out of you a little bit more. But for me, the squad has improved. I think Onana is an upgrade on Douglas Luiz, who had an amazing campaign there, and you've got Boubacar Kamara returning to play alongside him. Very solid defensively. I like this Villa squad, and I still believe Unai Emery is one of the best coaches in the league. When you add to that Jadon Philogene and potentially another player arriving in the forward line to replace Moussa Diaby, I'm still positive about Villa. Yes, they might drop back a little bit, and they might not finish fourth, but I'm not convinced about people talking about them tumbling right down because of Champions League football and suddenly being super drained. I think the squad looks quite fresh. Players like Ian Maatsen coming in are ready to perform at that level immediately. Onana ready to perform at that level immediately. These are some of my favourite signings of the summer under one of the 3 or 4 best coaches in the league. I think Villa are going to be good again. Okay, in fourth, I've got Tottenham Hotspur, who I think will progress on last season's campaign where they finished 5th. I think the summer business has been pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. I'm actually pretty hot on the Dominic Solanke deal. Yes, it was a lot of money. £65 million is a big old fee. But the signs were there last season. His work off the ball, his pressure numbers, his XG, that he is ready to take a step to a European club. Tottenham have gambled on it, and I think it will be a successful gamble. He's an upgrade on Richarlison. It allows Son to go back out to the left, where I think he's at his devastating best, cutting in. His back-to-goal play is pretty good. He's Premier League ready. There's a lot of positives to that deal. I love the Archie Gray signing. The midfield depth feels quite strong. You know, Van de Ven and Romero back to a second season. They've got a great goalkeeper in Vicario. I think there's loads of positives. Historically as well, you look at Postecoglou's sides in Scotland or in Australia, the second campaign where they've really bedded down, knuckled into how he wants to play his football, why he wants to play that way. They actually take a big step forward. And I'm expecting that from them. I'm expecting them to push third place really hard. You know, I'll reveal who I've got in third in a second, but I'm expecting them to have a big push. In third, I've got Liverpool. And this feels like one of my biggest gambles of this prediction because initially when I drew this up, I actually had them outside the top 4. But when I dug a bit deeper into the numbers, it gave me a lot more confidence about Liverpool. You know, across the Premier League campaign last year, first by expected goals, Salah put up 28 goal involvements, Nunez 19, Jota 30, I think Diaz around the same. Big goal-scoring numbers, and I do believe that bails teams out. Even if Slot's system doesn't quite work and they get a bit leaky at the back, which might well be the case, they've got the goal scorers to just bail them out in big moments. I think big season for Harvey Elliott coming up as well. He's been one of the best players on the Liverpool pre-season tour. For me, I'm just positive about the experienced heads. It's next season that probably worries me more. If they can't get Virgil van Dijk, Salah and Trent tied down, that would be a big concern. And another concern has been the lack of business. You know, this is starting to smell a little bit like David Moyes' first summer at Manchester United, where nothing was happening. No deals were coming through. They ended up with Fellaini on deadline day. They've talked about needing a 6, and now they're like, oh, we're not going to go for an alternative to Zubimendi. Surely there's backups been identified for a player who had rejected, you know, Barca, Real, Bayern, Arsenal. Surely. So there has to be some ins, but I think there will be. And I just believe in that forward line. I really do. So my champions of the Premier League season upcoming, I'm going for Arsenal. I think the Gunners are ready to take that next step. The defensive record last year was so remarkable, especially across the second half of the season. The solidity they showed, partly down to the fact they had extreme luck with injuries. There's no denying that. I think 6 of the starting 11 played about 95% of the available minutes, in particular William Saliba and Gabriel. That helped them. But the structure, the unit, was still there for me. And the additions of players like Calafiori, the return of a player like Jurrien Timber, only leads me to think that the defensive unit is going to be as good, if not better. So can the attacking line go to new levels? I think Saka will definitely maintain. I think Ødegaard will improve yet again on what was a really good season. As will Kai Havertz, who started a little bit shakily, but when he found his feet in the number 9 role, ended up the season with 20 goal involvements. That's not even taking into account Martinelli, who had a down year, and I do think is a potentially upgradable area for Mikel Arteta. And you get an equation that leads to yet more improvement. I think they're going to bring another midfielder in. Maybe it will be Mikel Merino. Obviously, more dual success than any player in La Liga last year. You've got a big physical team that's hard to beat, that plays great football, that dominates space. Field tilt-wise, Arsenal are a joke. You cannot get out against them when they've got you pinned in. I think Arsenal are going to be amazing. I reckon they go 92 plus points this season. And I just think City might have a little step back. And that's no disrespect to Man City, because 5p is obviously unheard of. It's incredible to even think it's a potential possibility. But with players slightly older, you know, Kevin De Bruyne, another year older, Ederson potentially wanted to leave this summer, a midfield that I still think needs a little bit of work. Rodri hasn't been injured consistently. You know, he puts up 50 games every single season. If he does, who comes in and fills in that role? Alvarez yet to be replaced. So there's still just a few tiny question marks. And there's no doubt I think City end up around the 90-point mark. But I just think Arsenal are ready to take that next step. City have had huge unbeaten runs across the last 4 seasons. 15 wins, 12 wins, 12 wins. Last season, 23 unbeaten. Just a little bit of hesitation from this City side, and I think Arsenal are ready to do it. So that was my 1 to 20 Premier League predictions. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. See you later.